Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. And tonight we're going to be talking about one of those things that is not going to be controversial at all. We're going to be talking about ageism and fandom. So we're going to be having a lot of fun this evening and kind of exploring what does it mean to be a fan and how can we be good fans, and sometimes how do some of the more toxic things come out of fandom. I'm going to be your host, Jim Nettles, but before we get started, let's go around and see who else is here. So Kelley, you're up first.
Hi, my name is Kelley Frank. I am a horror author, poet, and a artist. You can find me on morbidsmile.com. And I also have been in fandom for a long time as a fanfic writer and cosplayer.
Elektra?
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and an editor, and I too have been in fandom, oh wow, since the 80s sometime.
Trish?
Hey, I'm Trish Milburn. I'm a romance author, mainly of K-pop and K-drama romances now. And I also have been in one fandom or another for a very long time.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. I also independently publish several subgenres of romance and a science fiction series with my friend Jeannie Adams. I'm also the comics track director for ConTinual, and I've been active in fandom off and on for most of my adult life.
And Hansi?
I'm Hansi Oppenheimer. I'm an independent artist, filmmaker, and ACA-fan. And I recently completed a documentary on the writer Joe Lansdale, and we'll be screening that at NeCon next weekend. And it's the first time I've seen him since 2019, so I'm really excited.
So let's actually get started and talk a little bit about, where you guys got your start in fandom. Because, all of us, I know for me, before I even knew what fandom was, I grew up around Star Wars, Star Trek, a lot of sword and sorcery, fantasy, all that kind of good stuff for the 70s and 80s. What was it for you that kind of got that start for fandom? So Kelley, I'm going to start with you on that one.
That's a complicated question. So I think the thing that first got me into fandom was I saw Batman, like the Tim Burton Batman movie, 1989, in the theater. That was the first PG-13 movie I was allowed to go see, and it really just excited me. So I got obsessed with all things Batman, and I got obsessed with comics and interacting with other fans online. We had, and then when Batman the Animated Series came out in 1992, that just exploded, and that's when I really started getting into online spaces and messaging with people on AOL and things like that. And we had fan groups and fan fiction, and we used to write team fic and comics together, little fan things and zines and stuff. I didn't get really super into fandom as like kind of more activist fandom until I got into Vampire Chronicles fandom later, when it became more about the rights of fans to, express themselves, because Anne Rice famously cracked down on fans and had a complicated relationship with them. So yeah, that's kind of my start, when I got into it for fun and then got into it like taking it a little more academically seriously.
How about you, Elektra?
Well, aside from when I was, knee-high to a grasshopper, and my favorite TV show was the original Batman, the campy one.
Me too.
And I taught my brother how to talk, and his first word was Batman, which he may or may not deny. I was an original Trekkie because my dad watched Star Trek in the 60s, and I watched it with him because I was daddy's girl. I got real into stuff when I got into college, and I went someplace away from the parents, and I joined the local comic book club in town and the local Doctor Who club in town, and I started cosplaying. I joined the local SCA, and I started dressing up medievally, and I started wearing comic book costumes, and I might have acquired a nickname that later legally became my name. And I started doing all that kind of stuff, and by the time I gotten through college, I'd already started going to science fiction conventions, and I found my people. And this might have predated things like the internet becoming really big. ARPANET was just starting to happen. When the internet really started happening, I found groups and people, and I didn't get involved in internet things and people until that was more popular, but I went to quite a few conventions through the years and met folks from all over.
How about you, Trish?
It's hard for me to pinpoint like a specific fandom that I started with. It was more like if it was sci-fi TV and movies, I loved it. And it was like, I mean, all the way back to, like original Star Trek, the early, the original Star Wars movies, those were like came out when I was a kid. So I just hopped from one thing to another. Then when I found Dragon Con, and then I discovered this whole world of cosplay, and I was like, I wasn't as into it as a lot of people, but I did enjoy cosplaying a few things here and there. Probably the most active I've been in fandom is right now with K-pop fandom. It's like I discovered it. I fell in love with the music and kind of the whole world, and it changed the direction of what I write too. So I was kind of burned out writing what I was writing at the time, and I found this thing that I really loved, and I was like, well, let's try writing that. And so it just really just kind of changed my life.
How about you, Nancy?
I discovered the Legion of Superheroes when I was 8 years old, and they were my gateway drug for comic books. Mostly DC until I was in college when I started reading some Marvel titles. But, when I was growing up, there wasn't fandom per se. When I went to high school, to a summer program when I was in high school, I met another girl who was also a big comic book fan. But she didn't live anywhere near where I lived. So every once in a while we would exchange letters. And about the time we got out of school, she was in this Amateur Press Alliance, which is kind of like a chain letter for adults. There's a limited membership, and if you want to contribute, and there's a minimum activity requirement, you photocopy enough copies of your contribution for everybody to have one and there to be some extras. And then you mail it all to a masochist who's known as the central mailer, who then collates it into sets and uses an industrial strength stapler to join the contributions into sections. And this friend kind of cajoled, dragged, and bludgeoned me into getting on the wait list for Interlac. And that's when I found my tribe, because it's devoted to the Legion of Superheroes. Everybody loved the Legion of Superheroes. I started writing fan fiction that eventually led me to writing my own things. And then about that time, Shelton Drum started sponsoring the Heroes conventions here in Charlotte. And I met other local fans, one of whom I'd actually gone to high school with, and I didn't even know he was in the city. So there's like 5 or 6 of us who would hang out. We would go to the store on New Comic Book Day and stand around and talk. And we were organized fandom in Charlotte to the extent that we were organized, which is not very. And so, I've been in and out of Interlac. I go to conventions. I used to go to the Atlanta Fantasy Fair back before there was a Dragon Con, and that was a lot of fun. But I've never gotten into the online fandom, except I'm really active in comic book Twitter.
How about you, Hansi?
So I come from a completely different space. So both my parents worked in the industry. My dad worked at CDS and my mom ran a prop shop. So I was raised like on Marshall McLuhan and all this stuff. My dad was really avant-garde and was really into all that stuff and media as a message and all that. So I grew up very media savvy. And I was doing like Fluxus art pieces that I didn't realize were fanzines. I was asking different artists like Kenny Shaw, Keith Haring and stuff to send me original art, and I would copy it and then put it in plastic bags and distribute it and sell them, as these limited edition things. So I don't think I knew about band fandom, but I didn't really know about fandom until Buffy. And then I fell into the message boards and the bronze, and they had the series finale at a club at the athletic club in Hollywood, and I went, and some of the actors showed up, and yeah, it was just that group communal experience. I'd never really had that, and I became obsessed, as we do. And for the last 20 years, I've been documenting fan practices. So I have this huge archive of interviews with fans, and I have a university that's interested in acquiring it. So now I'm in the process of organizing a couple of million terabytes of footage.
That's all?
That's all.
Well, one of the things that fascinates me about fandom, and I mean, again, when I grew up in it, you didn't really, that concept didn't really exist. You just were a fan of, you were big into, you had your obsession, and some of them lasted a day or a week. Some of them last much longer. That's the reason that we, still see new Star Wars products coming out. We still see new Trek. We still see a lot of, Doctor Who. We've got these fandoms that have been around for a long time. And some of these become really part of identity. And I think this is one of those things of trying to identify and why we identify with these different topics. And that's always been one of the fun things for me to look at and study is, why do we become obsessed with the things that we do? Why do we resonate with certain things? And often, one of the things that happens is, especially for those of us that, we're not 19 anymore. For those of us that are looking at things from that perspective, that we remember those things that first grabbed our attention. If you've been into comic books for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and it's really only been, I'd say, in the last, call it decade, that comics have moved further into that more commercial space. For good, for bad, for ugly, it was no longer, something that was meant for teenage boys, and that was it. Haven't been raised that way. So Elektra, for you, what do your passions mean for you? Those aspects of fandom, and what do you do when somebody's like, wait, you're into X?
Oh, I mean, it became a second career for me when the first career fizzled out. I've got a couple of degrees in computer science. And when I ran into too much sexism, and we were living in a smallish town, and I could not get work as a programmer, I started proofreading and copy editing in science fiction. And I ended up making a whole career out of working in science fiction, which was one of my first loves. And I know a bunch of people who work in science fiction and work in comics, and I've gotten to know them over the years, and I still read comic books, and not as many as I used to. And there are boxes in the shed to prove it. But it's always been how I escaped, how I relaxed, how I found my joy. And watching fandom move into the mainstream, and everybody else thinks that comics and comic book characters are cool. And we have now, there's TV and movies and media and other ways to enjoy them.
Can I just interject?
Yeah.
As much as we think that we are part of pop culture, that we are no longer still a subculture, I was watching Paul with my daughter and my grandson, who are, more aware of the newer stuff, not the old stuff. And, Simon Pegg and Nick Frost are having this conversation from Comic-Con where they're just talking in fandom speak, and no one knows what they're talking about. They're like, Simon Shadowchild, blah, 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 and that's still true. We still have fangirl speak or fan speak that other people don't get. It's still a subculture in some ways.
And it always will be, but
yes,
we always will have our own little thing. But it's nice that people don't, there was a real evolution when it suddenly became a little less horrible to be a nerd.
Mhm.
Even for those of us who were nerdy and also on sports teams, it was kind of nice that people didn't pick on you for being a nerd anymore. and you could openly admit that you programmed computers for a living, or that nowadays that I edit books for a living, and nobody looks at me with the fact that I have purple hair. Now little kids come up to me and they think it's cool, and that just makes my day.
I'm kind of bummed about it. It's like, you people used to spit at me when they saw my tattoos. I much prefer that to having the cashier at Target show me her cherry tattoo on her ankle and think we're sisters of the ink, you know?
Well, how about you, Trish? I mean, especially getting into K-pop. I mean, you know, you and AJ Hartley.
Well, I mean, it was a big turning point for me too. Like, you know, like Elektra said, that it was, you know, kind of became a second career for her. It was me. I have been writing like cowboy romances for Harlequin for a number of years, and I had just gotten really burned out. I had tried for so long to get published, and then I finally did. And then the thing that I really wanted to do, I got to the point where I didn't want to do it anymore, you know, so I was super burned out and I didn't know what I was going to do. Harlequin was closing my lines anyway. So that's about the time that I found K-pop. I was on Netflix one day. It recommended a K-drama. I watched it. I heard some of the music that was in it and went, oh, I'm going to figure out who this is. Figured out it was a K-pop group. And then down the rabbit hole I went. So I had probably been listening to it for maybe 6 months, and I was like, maybe I'll try writing a story about a fictional group. And then it was like the joy in writing came back. So that was something that I knew I had kind of lost it, but I didn't know how much I had lost it. So this just sort of, you know, now are they selling like gangbusters? No, not yet, but hopefully we'll get to that point. but yeah, it was a big turning point for me, and now it's like I'm super into K-pop and K-drama Twitter. I've met a lot of really cool people online, and now we're beginning to meet a bit in person, going to concerts and that kind of thing. So that's been really fun. You know, it's funny, I'm also part of a group, like some of the younger fans, the less kind younger fans like to call those of us who are older who like K-pop hags. So there are some of us who, a friend of mine named Frankie who lives in Australia, she had a YouTube channel where she was doing K-pop reactions, but then she was like, had this idea of like a K-pop talk show. So she started that, and it's called Road to Hagdom. So we kind of leaned into it. So most of it, not everybody is older, but most of us are, you know, 40s, 50s, and we're very much of it's just music. If it may, and especially in the times we're living in now, I'm all for things that make you happy, that don't hurt other people. You know, it's like, so if it makes me happy, I'm going to go. I mean, I listen to K-pop all the time. I watch K-dramas all the time. And, you know, and then when I think about it, it's the K-drama thing is not all that surprising when I think back to when I was a kid. Do y'all remember, like in the 70s and 80s, there were those like mini series that were on TV, like Shogun and Marco Polo, and the ones that were set in Asia. I don't know why. I mean, I was a kid living in rural Kentucky, but for some reason I had an affinity for those. And then I didn't think about it much beyond that. And now it's like I've kind of watched, you know, K-dramas and J-dramas, you know, dramas from Thailand, Taiwan, China, Japan, Korea. And it's just, I don't know. It was just something that spoke to me.
It is interesting because so many of the fans I know of K-pop are women in their 50s, 40s, 50s. Yeah, they're older women, which surprised me. Yeah.
But that's the thing, though. It's like, I know guys who are into K-pop, and, you know, and then I have my friends that I've met through K-pop. They're all the way from, you know, teenagers to people in their 70s. So it's like, I think that people, and the media is part of the problem with this. It's like the media, especially Western media, tends to only talk about BTS, and they only talk about the teenage girl fans. And it's so much wider and more complex than that.
So how about you, Nancy?
Well, I was a not very athletic geek child surrounded by outdoorsy athletic girls. And I discovered the Legion of Superheroes and through them comic books, and then science fiction and fantasy kind of all around the same time. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of the classic nerd who escaped into that a lot of the time, but I loved it. And I loved, one of the lines from Camelot is might for right. Well, that's the Legion of Superheroes. That's superheroes. And I loved it. And I loved the fact that they could do these cool things. And I loved wizards. So fast forward, and I was in my trying to get published phase. And the historical romance market, which is what I was initially trying, was very limited in the periods that they would consider publishing, the traditional publishers. And unfortunately, those are not my favorite periods to write. So I thought, well, I'll just try something different. And I'll go with paranormal romance. But I didn't feel like I had anything to bring to Vamps or Shifters. But I've loved wizards my whole life, and magic's kind of a superpower. And so I tried to bring the camaraderie of the Legion of Superheroes into a romance novel, because, novels featuring groups of friends are really popular. My groups of friends just happen to be mages. And so that's inspired that series. And in my head, they're all wearing capes. But I got into fandom when women in fandom were really scarce. There were just not very many of us. And it was before the internet. So I think one reason I've never gotten into online fandom is I started in fandom before that was a thing. And so it just really hasn't occurred to me to go seek that out. We do Zoom, still in Interlac again, and we do collations over Zoom while the masochistic central mailer is assembling sets. The rest of us sit in front of our computers and talk to them. So that's kind of fun, and it's a way to keep in touch with people and fanish interests and rag on books that we don't like and all that fun stuff. But that's kind of it for me. It tapped into the things that I really like: action, adventure, explosions, people trying to do the right thing. And then that kind of fed into my writing. And so that series has recently reverted to me. So I'm reissuing it and continuing it. And I'm really happy about that.
How about you, Hansi?
So I've never considered myself a nerd. I was always a freak, I grew up in New York City in the 70s. I was a freak. I grew up on horror comics. I read, Famous Monsters and Tomb of Dracula and Vampirella. I used to write to Forey Ackerman. We had like a correspondence. He used to call me my Liebling Hansi. And I kept saying one day I'm going to come out and do a tour of the Ackermansion film, but yeah, just never happened, and I'm really sorry it didn't happen, but yeah, he was lovely. So yeah, those were my inspirations, and I'm still, a huge horror geek, and go to film festivals and have panels on women in horror and stuff. In fact, I'm doing one at Dragon Con, I think.
Kelley?
Well, my parents were into I think they were really into comics, but not to the same extent that I am. My dad had a story that I heard a lot growing up about how he used to collect Superman comics when he was a kid, and he happened to get a copy of Superman #1, the Action Comics #1. And when he went off to college, my grandmother threw them all in the trash because she didn't think they were useful at all. So he was always, and my mom collected, she was a horror fan, so she was super into EC comics and stuff like that. Mostly for the storytelling. So so they were both very, very supportive of comic collecting and stuff like that, and not throwing things out. And he was like, here's how to protect them, here's how to put them in sleeves. So I was going to comic book stores pretty early on and having conversations with other fans and getting the typical things of oh, you're a Batman fan, name all the Robins, that kind of a thing. Just how that goes. And it kind of meant that, whether I wanted to engage with other fans was always kind of, an iffy thing for like a young teenage girl in a comic shop surrounded by dudes that may be like staring at them a little too much while they're bent down looking at, racks of comics and boxes.
There's still that toxic element. Like I was just at this horror con, I was making the noise to and someone's like, that's not how it goes. Like, you understood what it was. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, but that was just like in April. I mean,
no, I know, and it's weird because like when I have the option now, I will buy comics online because I don't like to have to be confronted by the weird potential of toxicity. Do you know what I mean? So I've moved a lot into online fandoms, but because I was in comic book spaces a lot, I got into trading card games for a little while and used to do Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments. And that was interesting because that actually spurred me to write my master's thesis. In another life, I was an English professor. And my master's thesis was on language and acquisition in self-made cultural fan groups and fandom groups as individual cultural bubbles with their own language and their own communication styles. And it was, it took me a long time to put it together, but that kind of thing was kind of my bread and butter, was that kind of fandom studies, and then sort of fell out because, teaching English right now is mostly about grading papers instead of about research. So but it's still very interesting because now what I end up doing is trying to help like young fans like figure out how to navigate difficult toxicity spaces. I came out a few years ago as asexual, and so that explained a lot. And then helping young people who are maybe like panromantic or trans or whatever to like help to navigate those spaces and navigate that potential gatekeeping and stuff like that is helpful. So somehow I've ended up being like people's grandma, and I'm like, I'm only 42, but it's just how that goes, you know what I mean? So con mom is what you end up being.
I'd like to just pick up on something that Kelley said for a minute here. There was a big discussion on comics Twitter last year about hostility to women in comic shops. And I'm happy to say that I've never experienced that in my local shop. The owner's a nice guy. He hires people who are nice. They don't do that. But paying attention to people's comments on Twitter, I've really come to realize that there are some shops that instead of saying, oh, you want to buy a comic, come in and give us money, they'll say, well, who are you to be interested in this kind of thing, which would seem to be counterproductive business-wise, but it's apparently very common.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's strange because it's like our comic shop owner himself wasn't weird, but a lot of the people were, and he didn't like actively like stop it. And one thing that like one of my female friends came with me, and they had to use the bathroom during that time of the month, and there was no trash can back there. And so it just, just little things like that don't make the place like
welcoming
friendly
for
for
women.
everyone. You know what I mean? And so there's that implication that like you're not really supposed to be there. That's a weird kind of thing, but it's like a tiny little thing that makes a big difference for people. You know what I mean? Like it's not actively discouraging, but it's sort of passively discouraging. And then not stopping people from saying like really just confrontational things to people to prove their fan street cred is just, it's gatekeeping, and it's weird because I just want to spend money on comics, guys.
Well, and maybe let's kind of start going down that path some, because I mean, again, we've seen it all in shops, we've seen it at conventions, we've seen a lot of stuff where to one extent we've seen fandom getting older. We've seen fandom carrying forward. But at the same time, when there's some of the events that I've done where it is a very young crowd or where it's a very male centric crowd, wherever the case may be, and it's almost there's a sense of ownership of I'm a fan and it has to be exactly my way. And anything that doesn't fit into that, well, then you're not my fandom, So Trish, and so I'm gonna start with you on this one, because I think you probably get a fair amount of this from K-pop as well. But I know all of you guys have had some of this sort of stuff. How do you deal with basically that, for lack of a better term, really toxic behavior? Or if some of those sorts of things, how are you dealing with that when you run into some of these situations?
Liberal use of the block button. Depending on the thing is I have curated my timeline to where I typically only see those things secondhand. Like if somebody that I know that I'm a mutual with on Twitter, if they will quote tweet something that's problematic, and then maybe I'll wade into a discussion or whatever. But a lot of the time I will try to just give a different perspective respectfully, even if the original person wasn't originally respectful. And then if, I've done that a few times to where some of the people were like, okay, now I see it from a different perspective. But a lot of times they just double down. And that's when you just block, because it's like, I'm not going to argue with someone who could possibly just be a 14-year-old. I don't know how old they are. I don't know, because most people don't use their own photo on K-pop Twitter, especially not the younger fans. They'll have a picture of whoever it is they like in a K-pop group or whatever. So it's like you don't know who you're arguing with or trying to have a productive discussion with. Some of them, I fully believe they're just there to be agents of chaos. And they love anything that gets a lot of traction and discussion, even if it's ugly. So it's like, yeah, I don't have time in my life for you. Goodbye. There are certain fandoms that because of their size, you're going to have a bigger, it seems like more people, but it may be like the same percentage of toxic fans from fandom to fandom. But if you have a larger fandom, it becomes more obvious. And to me, it's counterproductive when they do ugly things, whether they're attacking older fans or there's a lot of fighting between fandoms, like our group is better and your group, our group did it first and blah, blah. It's a bunch of nonsense, but they do it anyway. So yeah, a lot of the time it's like, sometimes you can get through to people, but other times it's just, they're just there to stir up stuff. And there's nothing really you can do about that except just block and ignore them. Don't give those conversations air.
How about you, Nancy?
Well, I try to ignore those conversations too. When fans get into, it has to be my way or it's not legitimate. It's just, grow up.
Right.
We can have differences of opinion and still love something. For example, Nightwing, should he be with Dick Grayson, be with Barbara Gordon? Should he be with Starfire Coriander, or should he be, playing the field or with any one of another half a dozen possibilities? And people will go to the mat on that and go to the wall on that. And I had a young male fan tell me on Twitter, we were in a Nightwing group, because I like Dick and Barbara, but I like Dick and Corey too. I've been a Nightwing fan since there was a Nightwing. I can see the benefits to all of it. And I said, I think we should just agree to disagree on this. And he came back with how I was not a legitimate fan because I couldn't see how terrible Barbara was for Dick.
Oh, wow.
And, the other people in the group went, whoa, wait a minute. So that was a little bit different. But I had an experience at Dragon Con several years ago that has stayed with me. The gray in my hair is natural. It's been there a while. And I was in the elevator at one of the hotels going up, and there were 5 guys in their 20s in the elevator with me. It was just the 6 of us. And, frequently a Dragon Con elevator will stop at every floor, but this was not one of the nights when that was happening. And I kind of like in the glass elevator, I like to look down at the lobby floor and watch while the elevator goes up. And so I wasn't really paying attention to them. And one of the guys goes to me, "What are you doing here?" Just in about that tone of voice. And I wanted to say, I have been in fandom longer than you've been alive. What are you doing here? But it was me and 5 20-something guys in that elevator. The hostility was palpable, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up.
Oh,
And I
geez.
thought, that is a do not engage sign. So if I'd been in a dealer's room, I would have done that. In the elevator, just us? No. So what I did instead was just say, "Oh, well, you know, there's a lot of Superman stuff here, and I love Superman. I've loved Superman since I was a kid." And they dismissed me as a ditz. And, you know, that's okay, because I'm never going to see them again, and I don't care what they think. But it's a situational response, because I think we've all had that hair on the back of the neck feeling, and I just didn't want to get into it with them. So I fortunately have not had a lot of that experience. What I tend to get sometimes is people saying, "Well, you just don't understand because it's like this. And like this is based on the new 52. My fandom goes back to the Silver Age. I know what it was before the new 52. And while I totally agree with Hansi that it really doesn't matter where you come from, if you're a fan, if you are a new fan, don't tell older fans they're full of it, because you don't have the perspective to make that judgment. And so, like Trish said, when people are just like that, I block, I unfollow. If I see them respond to something, I don't respond to it, because it's like the tar baby in the story. It's like you punch that and then you get stuck, and then you punch it again and then you get stuck again. It's a waste of time, and it's counterproductive. But I think those guys in the elevator would have been a lot nicer if I were still in my 20s at that point.
Of course, they'd hit on you.
Yeah, they'd be hoping to get something out of the situation for themselves. So,
Right.
Yeah.
How about you, Hansi?
You know, I live in New York City. I'm pretty used to toxic stuff, and I don't really take a lot of guff. So when I was at Dragon Con last year, and I was wearing my Ash cosplay, and I had this huge chainsaw arm, and some of the kids riding the skateboards, or the motorcycle skateboards, they have those whatever they're, and one of the guys tried to grab my chainsaw, and like I pulled it back, and I started screaming and cursing him out, and like everybody's looking, and he's trying to get away. It's like, damn you, you could have broken this thing. Just me.
Well, and that's assault on top of everything else. So he should have lost his badge for that. But unfortunately, the people
It wasn't even.
badges are not around.
It wasn't even someone at. It was one of the, the kids who hang
out.
I
see. Out in the street. I see. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
But you do see a lot of that at Dragon Con and other cons, where like you were talking about the 20-something guys. There's some of them there. They may not even be like what you would call fans. It's like they're there to look at the hot girls in costumes, you know, and touch when they're not supposed to touch.
And get wasted.
And get wasted. And then do all of those things. So.
Well, I think like we all have our groups that we hang out when we go to cons. Like I have a group of fan women that I'm, usually meet up with, and then, we're in formation.
Safety in numbers.
Well, Kelley, how about you? And as you said, you've kind of become con mom,
Yeah. Well, and it's weird because I don't know if you all are familiar with anime, but I one of the characters I cosplay is and I got into cosplay fairly late, like probably in my mid to late 30s. So it's just like, I'm like, oh, wow, actually seriously cosplaying with a cosplay troupe and doing, photo shoots and things like that. But one of the characters I cosplay is Grell Sutcliffe. So Grell is a trans woman, Grim Reaper with a chainsaw, wears all red, very flamboyant. She's very cool, but one thing that I discovered with cosplaying her, as opposed to cosplaying like Heath Ledger's Joker, which I usually cosplay, is people will try to I have had people try to jump in and like kiss me, hug me, sit on me when I'm sitting places. All these kind of things where they treat you like you're like a prop instead of like a person. I've had people ask if my boobs are real. I've had like all kinds of just strange things. And sometimes there are people who are in cosplay also, but they're younger and they're in, like being their character, and they're in character, and they're like, well, this is what Deadpool would do, so I'm going to do what Deadpool does. And it's like, no, it's not cool. Just things like that are odd. So the thing about my the younger fans that I usually hang out with is when I see stuff like that happening to them, I will intervene. I will go in and like mama bear it and be like, excuse me. And I've got a plastic chainsaw. I'll be like, what are you doing? That kind of a thing. Or if I'm the Joker, I've got a potato peeler. What are you? That kind of a thing. But when it's happening to me, I have a tendency to more like freeze up and just be like, that kind of a thing, because it's easier to defend someone than it is to like defend yourself sometimes, I guess, is weird. So, but I realize that I have to like model behavior for other people. And so like, if you act like it's okay, it's not okay. I've seen people come up to folks in cosplay and ask if like, I've never kissed a cosplayer before. Can I kiss you? Just weird things like that. And some cosplayers will do it because they feel like, oh, this is cool. And it's like, no, this is assault, dude. This is not cool. Are you comfortable? You're not comfortable, then run. But yeah, that kind of thing. Online spaces, what I usually try to do is, I'm a Joker fan, but my fandom goes back since before like Harley Quinn was invented or created. And so like, I don't see him as a straight character. I see him as pretty flamboyantly gay. And so it's very odd to see fans that are diehard straight Joker, and they're like, how dare you? That's not how the character is. And it's like, ooh, like you said, that's New 52. This is like since the 90s, and that's not the Joker that I like, and that's okay. You can like yours and I can like mine, but you just, the block button is your friend, basically, in those cases.
I didn't start cosplaying until I was like 61.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've only been cosplaying for the last year or two. And, it's awesome. Because I used to be shooting at cons all the time. So I was hauling around my gear. There was no way. And suddenly I wasn't hauling around my gear, and all my friends were having fun dressing up. And I'm like, well, I'll just try this. And then
why not?
Time I like walked down the street in my tick costume, and people ran out of the bars at San Diego Comic-Con to take my picture. I was like, this is the best.
It is. And it's so much fun, but it's also like, there is, cosplay is not consent and all that kind of stuff. And
you do get hit on.
Yeah, you get hit on, and then if they, find out that you're older than they think, they're like, oh, what do you do? Why are you cosplaying? It's like, I wasn't aware there was a law against it. What are you, the police? That kind of a thing. So I just get sassy.
How about you, Elektra?
I think most of it's been covered. I have not yet been to Dragon Con. I keep hoping I'll make it one of these years. I do know there have been some issues with people who assign themselves to be the gatekeepers. There'll be some person who decides that they are the be it and end all of this particular fandom, and they'll start quizzing people and saying like, you don't get to be a fan of this unless you can answer my questions. And what issue such and such happened, if it's comic fandom, or what episode of some TV show. And nobody gets to be the gatekeeper, even if you aren't new to comics, or you don't know as much about something. If you're interested in it, you get to be a fan if you want to. Nobody gets to tell you that your fandom is invalid. Right. It's supposed to be welcoming to all.
like on the topic of gatekeepers, it's like it's weird that there's like this gatekeeping thing no matter what the fandom is. It's
True.
just, it's kind of dumb, but it's
Mhm.
like in K-pop fandom, it's like the gatekeep, there are people who gatekeep and say, well, you're not a real fan of X unless you buy this many albums, or you vote for them this many times on the music shows, or you go to this many concerts. And I'm just like, you can be a fan and not be made of money. It's like, if you enjoy the music, you're a fan. But they come up with all these, checklists and stuff. And I'm just like, okay, that's just nonsense. So
Don't you think that comes from, to some degree, from people's need to feel important and not getting that anywhere else?
and that is possible. And that goes back to you don't know who you're talking to. It could be a kid who maybe their home life isn't awesome, and this is a way they assert some sort of power in their life, or they could just be a little shit. So I mean, who knows,
Mhm.
But I'd just like to add one thing. Trish and I have a friend, Ceresia Glass, who wrote a romance novel last year that's a combination of Project Runway and a science fiction con. It's called the Love Con, and it's a cosplay contest like Project Runway. And it's a wonderful story, but Ceresia's heroine is a plus size woman and she's Black. And Ceresia addresses, in a very non-accusatory way. It's not a book that she's not setting out to make readers feel uncomfortable if they happen to be white or not plus size or whatever. But it's a wonderful look at cosplay and everything that goes into making the costumes. But the producers are trying to set up the heroine as the angry Black woman. And so, since we're talking about stereotyping, I just thought I would throw that out there and give Ceresia's book a little plug, because it's a terrific romance. And if you are a nerd and you're into cons and cosplay and you read romance, you might really enjoy that book.
Thanks.
Well, something I want to throw out in here with the conversation is, we started a lot of this is, primarily around ageism. And I mean, but we've hit on a lot of the different sort of issues and things that come up. And obviously there's a lot of other things. I mean, we've not talked necessarily about social media and stuff yet as well. But I mean, a lot of us do a lot of conventions. We do a lot of appearances. We do a lot of interacting with fans, things at conventions like this. And, one of the things that we see sometimes, and not necessarily everybody on the outside does, but people, from the industry side of things, see that there's also some of these problems with the idea of gatekeepers or who's in the in club, things along those lines. Is there anything you guys want to kind of go through and discuss from that perspective?
One thing I want to make sure we comment on is there have been a general movement in the sci-fi cons to try and be more inclusive and try and have more guests who are not, for lack of a better word, old white guys. Sorry, Jim. Because when science fiction publishing first started, pretty much all the writers were older and male, and well, they were all male and white, and now they are all older. And it was hard for women to get into publishing at first. It was harder for people of color to get into publishing at first. It was harder for people who weren't straight to get into publishing at first. And so there's been an actual movement among the conventions to try and get all of these people who have been from marginalized communities a chance to make up for it. And because of that, we can't always have the same people who've been there year after year continue to be guests, because there's a finite number of slots for guests. And if you want to have new people come in, some of the older people can't be there every year. And predictably, some people say, I get it, I can't be a guest every year. And some people say, I do not understand this. Why can't I be a guest every year? And they complain.
It's kind of like the RWA soap opera that played out on social media a couple of years ago. Because people who had been in traditionally disadvantaged groups in terms of leadership and access were basically saying, can you move your chair over so I can sit at the table too? This is my take on it. Other people have their own. This is my personal opinion. And some people interpreted that as get out of your chair and give it to me,
Right.
which is not what a lot of us heard, but it is what a fair number of people heard.
Yeah.
And so I think there are always going to be people who, having been accustomed to be in the accepted tier, for lack of a better way to put it, when they find that other people are being shuffled in and therefore they're not going to be in the accepted tier every year, for some reason, just get bent out of shape about it. I don't know.
But it's like with RWA and probably individual fandoms and stuff too, you're going to have an element of it being just a microcosm of the country at large. It's like you just have these big problems that get, squished down to the size of the organization or the fandom. So it's like you're having to deal with the same kind of problems there on a micro level that you are in the country at a macro level.
Mhm.
Well, and another thing that people are failing to consider possibly is that more of the programming at conventions is diverse programming, and you need diverse participants to make that work. You
Right.
can't talk about the role of other people in writing things and have an all-white panel talk about it and have it make sense.
Like you see that on like news programs sometimes, and you're just like, hello, why are all these like old white men talking about, the overturn of Roe or, or whatever. It's like,
Or talking, a bunch of straight people talking about same-sex marriage.
right. Yeah. It's
very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we get out of here, there's one last thing I'd like to make sure we at least touch on, because one of the things that I think has been really positive is we're seeing more and more people and more older people find fandoms, find things that they love, find things that they're passionate about that brings them value. So is there something you've got to say to anybody that's coming in that is not sure, that maybe they're looking and going, well, maybe I'm too old for this. It's not written for me, something along those lines. Is there anything you guys want to tell people that are potentially being introduced to things that spur creativity? They spur a passion for it, things that come in and really give back meaning to life. I mean, because again, that's part of the reason we do all these things as creative outlets. We're giving people experience. We're giving people hopefully those things that will, let them experience what they want to, or give them a release, help educate them, inform them, whatever the case may be. So for somebody that's finding something that it's not necessarily marketed to them, or not, quote unquote, not necessarily, quote unquote, appropriate for them, is there anything you guys want to say for people that are coming in and discovering things that give them new passions, give them new loves?
Yeah. If you like it, it's for you. It's just that simple.
And welcome.
Yeah.
Join us.
So how can people go out there and find those fandoms, find the people that they're going to resonate with for these fandoms? Because I think that often is the hardest part, is to go to the places where you can just be a fan and enjoy and share that love of the experience. Because again, social media has a lot of wonderful things to it. It can also be a toxic shithole.
Yeah.
And sometimes we see things that have been really productive places, really social places, go over that way because of a handful of people in them. So is there something you guys can give in terms of advice for people to help find those healthy fandoms, those healthy groups, those places that people can go and share?
If you don't live in the middle of podunk, godforsaken nowhere, check and see if there are any local groups that do the thing that you are interested in. If you're interested in anime, there might be a group that meets up to watch anime together, and you'll be shocked. It's people of all ages, young people and old people sitting together watching the same stuff. If you're into science fiction, there will be groups. If you're into K-pop, there will be groups that get together and listen to music together.
Yeah.
Or, even online groups. It's like, you know, I do live in the middle of podunk nowhere. So I doubt that any of my geriatric neighbors are going to be up for watching K-pop videos. But it's the coolest feeling when you connect with people and they live like a world away. It's like I literally have really good friendships that I've made through this fandom all around the world. You know, people of all different ages, all different sexes, genders, nationalities, people who English is not their first language, but you still find a way to communicate. It's just, you know, I think about back when, because I was a teenager before the internet too. And it's like, you know, you feel sort of alone in the things that you like and stuff. But then, you know, I think about now how easy it is to connect with other people literally around the world, people who have the same love and passion for the things that you do.
And I think sometimes groups can be cliquish. Some of them just are. And if the group is cliquish and you don't feel welcome, don't waste your time on trying to find a way in, find another group.
Right.
Don't let toxic fans or toxic situations keep you from feeling like this is a place to hang out with. There are always other groups. And you know, I am a person in the Harry Potter fandom, and the Harry Potter fans have been some of the biggest critics of J.K. Rowling. And that's, you know, the fans are the ones leading the charge. And, you know, that's totally okay. You can love something and you can be willing to like find other fans that are like-minded. You are not alone in your particular interpretation or love of something that exists.
Right. It takes some trial and error, but you can eventually find your people.
Yes.
Can I also suggest that if you're creative at all, I mean, one of the things I do with Squee Projects is, you know, I throw out an idea, you know, and I'll just ask everyone to like, can you send me a video of you doing this, or, you know, your favorite show or whatever, and people will send stuff back and then they become friends. And so like you can put out your creative ideas and build a group of fandom, you know, for transmedia works that way too. And, you know, then you're like Gishwes, you know, that's another like, you know, great activism thing, community.
Yeah. Like, there's a really niche fandom out there, right? Like Soul Reaver. It's a video game series, the Legacy of Kain series. I didn't know there was even a fandom that existed for this, and I love this game, and I would have joined that fandom until someone I saw that an artist I follow had a commission for Soul Reaver fan art, and then the comments were full of, hey, let's find each other and create a fan group so we can talk about Soul Reaver. So I mean, there's lots of ways to find people.
Yeah, there's a remarkably active Buckaroo Banzai fandom, considering how old that is.
Oh yeah.
We've all found each other.
Yeah, I've got a copy sitting right over here.
I did a short doc on just featuring fangirls and you know what, you know, them talking about their experiences, you know, cosplaying and different things, fanfic. We wanted to do a doc, but we couldn't. We ended up doing a 10-minute short, and I've shown it in libraries and some educational spaces. And one library performance was so cool because a whole bunch of kids came to celebrate one girl's birthday, and they were all like, especially when we started talking about fanfic, they were like, oh my God, you all ladies know about that stuff. It was great. It was really cute.
Well, and I think hopefully the thing that everybody got out of this was A, don't be an ass. Everybody can be a fan of something and love something in their own way. And B, find the people that can love that with you the same way, and you guys can share and have a great experience. And if you're being an ass, expect to catch hell for being an ass. I want to thank everybody for coming on and having this chat tonight. But before we get out of here, I want to make sure everybody knows where to come find everybody. And because apparently there are no adults in the room, I'm going to go backwards. So Hansi, where can everybody find you and all the good stuff?
You can find me on my website, Squee Projects, SQUEE projects.com. And I'm also Squee Projects on Instagram and Twitter. I'm also Squee Media as my alternate account. because I'm yappy.
Nancy?
My website is nancynorthcott.com. I spend more time on Twitter than is probably good for me. At Nancy Northcott, and that's the easiest way to connect with me on social media. I have a Facebook author page, but every time I log onto it, Facebook is, see the new features on your page. And I'm like,
So
oh, please not now. So
Again,
that's not a good place to find me. So Twitter or my
Yeah.
website.
Trish?
Yeah, Twitter is where I'm mainly at too, at Trish Milburn. I have two websites. One is just my main author website. It's trishmilburn.com. But then I launched one called Word of the K, the letter K. It's where I put all of my stuff about my K-pop and K-drama books, and I do kind of more lengthy blog posts about Korean entertainment.
Elektra?
I'm Elektra Hammond. You can find anything you need to find out about me at untilmidnight.com.
And Kelley?
I'm Kelley M. Frank. I'm at morbidsmile.com. That is my artist handle. You can also find me on Instagram. That's the best way to contact me, is on morbid_smile. Just at me and I'll be happy to have convos.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host, Jim Nettles, and you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the speculativefictionacademy.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And we will see everybody again soon.
thank you.
Bye.